Whoa. Okay. So, rumor has it, and I want to be clear, this is just a rumor, a fun one, that somewhere out there, in some version of this wild, beautiful universe, he's fallen in love again. Keanu, our Keanu. And the internet is losing it, not because it's shocking, but because if it's true, it's just kind of beautiful, right? A guy who's been through so much, still believing in that stuff. Love, connection, the good stuff. So tonight, we're not here to confirm anything or gossip or pretend we know his heart better than he does. We're here because his story, real or rumored, reminds us of something simple. It's never too late, and you're never too guarded to fall in love again. There's a moment in every person's life, quiet, unannounced, easy to miss if you're not paying attention, when you stop performing. You stop adjusting your face for the room. You stop calculating what version of yourself will be most acceptable, most impressive, most safe. And in that moment, something strange happens. You become available. Not available in the way people usually mean it. Available to be swept up, available to be chosen, but available in a much rarer way. Available to yourself first. Most of us spend years, sometimes decades, building a version of ourselves for public consumption. We learn early that the world rewards certain things: composure, achievement, the appearance of having it together, and we learn to perform those things whether or not we feel them. It's not dishonesty, exactly. It's survival, it's armor. And armor, when you wear it long enough, starts to feel like skin. You forget you put it on. You forget there was ever a version of you underneath it waiting. But here's the strange, quiet truth that nobody talks about enough. Love, real love, the kind that actually holds, does not arrive at the gates of your performance. It does not knock politely and wait to be let into the show you've built for everyone else. It arrives after the show has ended. It arrives when you're tired of holding your face a certain way. It arrives in sweatpants, in silence, in the version of you that forgot someone was watching. This is why the people who find real love later in life, after loss, after disappointment, after having every reason to become guarded and hard, this is why their stories move us so much. Not because it's surprising that they found someone, but because it means something in them stayed soft. It means they didn't let the armor become permanent. It means somewhere along the way, they let themselves be honest again with their own fear, their own grief, their own hope, before they ever let another person in, because that's the order it actually happens in. We think love is about finding the right person, and maybe that's part of it. But before that, always before that, there is a private, unglamorous reckoning with yourself. A moment where you stop lying about what you want. A moment where you admit, maybe only to the mirror, maybe only at 3 in the morning, that you're tired of being fine, that you want something real, even if real is inconvenient, even if real doesn't match the story you've been telling the world about who you are and what you need. This kind of honesty is not comfortable. It asks you to let go of the identity you built to protect yourself. It asks you to stop being the strong one, the unshakable one, the one who doesn't need anything from anyone. It asks you to admit that need is not weakness. It never was. Need is just proof that you're still alive in there, still reachable, still capable of being moved. And this is exactly why the people who seem least likely to fall in love again are so often the ones who do, because they've already lost the thing most of us are still protecting, the illusion of having it all figured out. They've already been humbled by life in ways that strip away performance. When you've been through enough, you stop caring about looking untouchable. You start caring about being touched, really touched, by something true. Fans, friends, strangers online, they always want to know the details. Who is it? How did it happen? What does it mean? But the details were never really the point. The point is what it reveals about the inside of a person, that after everything, after the noise, After the years of being observed and judged and mythologized by people who never really knew them, they still had the capacity to be quietly, privately honest with themselves. And that honesty is what made room for someone else to walk in. This is the part of the story that gets skipped because it isn't as fun to talk about as the reveal, but it's the real headline, not who they fell for, not how unexpected it was. The real story is that somewhere along the way, they stopped performing long enough to hear their own heart again. And once you can hear it, once you stop drowning it out with noise and image and expectation, it becomes very hard to ignore what it's telling you. Maybe that's the invitation in all of this. Not to speculate about someone else's life, but to ask the same question of your own. When was the last time you stopped performing? When was the last time you let yourself want something without immediately explaining it away? Because if love finds people who've stopped pretending, then the work isn't in searching harder. The work is in becoming someone who no longer needs the armor, someone honest enough to be found. There is a particular kind of person the world struggles to understand, not because they are complicated, but because they were never trying to be understood in the first place. They walked through rooms without asking for anyone's blessing. They made choices without holding them up to the light for approval. And because of that, when something significant happens in their life, the world reacts with a strange kind of shock, as if surprise itself is proof that something unusual has occurred. But the truth is simpler and quieter than that. The person who surprises everyone is very often the person who stopped needing anyone's permission a long time ago. We live in a culture addicted to consensus. We check reactions before we commit to feelings. We wait to see how something will be received before we decide whether we're allowed to want it. This is so normal now that we barely notice we're doing it, glancing sideways at the crowd before we let ourselves feel something fully. And so when someone moves through the world without doing that, without waiting for the room's permission, it registers as rebellion even when it isn't meant as one. It's not rebellion, it's just freedom. And freedom looks unfamiliar to people who have forgotten what it feels like. Think about the moments in your own life that mattered most. Chances are, at least one of them made someone raise an eyebrow. Chances are, somebody somewhere thought you were making a mistake, moving too fast, choosing the wrong thing, wasting your time on someone or something that didn't fit the shape they expected your life to take. And if you were lucky, if you were brave, you did it anyway, not out of defiance, but because some part of you trusted your own judgment more than you trusted the comfort of being agreed with. This is the quiet, unglamorous kind of courage nobody puts on posters. It doesn't look like standing on a stage or making a grand declaration. It looks like closing the door on outside opinion long enough to hear your own voice. It looks like choosing a person, a path, a risk without first taking a vote. And the world, which is so used to being consulted, doesn't always know what to do with someone who simply didn't ask. That's why, when a person like this finally does something the public can see, falls in love, changes direction, walks away from what everyone expected, it lands like a surprise, even a shock. But look closer and you'll see that nothing about it was sudden. It was building quietly, privately for a long time, in all the moments where that person chose their own instincts over the comfort of being predictable. The surprise isn't really about the event. The surprise is about finally witnessing, from the outside, a freedom that had already existed on the inside for years. There's a lesson buried in this that's easy to miss if you're only watching the headline. We tend to admire people who don't care what others think, as if it's a personality trait they were simply born with, like eye color. But it's not a trait, it's a decision made over and over, often at real cost. It means disappointing people. It means being misunderstood. It means tolerating the discomfort of silence when you expected applause, or confusion when you expected celebration. Most people cannot bear that discomfort for long. They fold, they check the room, they adjust the choice to match the expected reaction. But some people, quietly, without announcement, decide the discomfort is worth it. And that decision, repeated enough times, becomes a kind of invisible strength that the world only notices when it finally produces a visible result. This is why the ones who never needed approval are so often the ones who end up living lives nobody saw coming. Not because they were reckless, not because they didn't care about anyone, but because they learned at some point that seeking approval before feeling something fully is its own kind of self-abandonment. If you wait for permission to want what you want, you may spend your whole life waiting. Some people simply stopped waiting, and there's something important hidden in the way the public reacts to these moments. The disbelief, the flood of questions, the refusal to simply accept it at face value. That reaction says more about the audience than about the person being watched. We are, so many of us, still waiting for permission in our own lives, permission to leave, to begin again, to want something inconvenient, to love someone who doesn't fit the story we thought we were supposed to tell. So when we see someone act without needing that permission, it unsettles something in us. It reminds us of the waiting we're still doing. It reminds us of the vote we're still taking before we allow ourselves to feel. Maybe this is the real reason these moments capture so much attention, not because of who the person is, but because of what their freedom exposes in the rest of us. Somewhere in that disbelief is a quiet, uncomfortable question. If they didn't need anyone's approval to live the life they wanted, what's stopping the rest of us from doing the same? What are we still waiting to be told is acceptable? Whose reaction are we still bracing for before we let ourselves want what we want? The people who move differently through the world aren't magic. They aren't fearless in some superhuman way. They've simply made peace with being misunderstood in the short term in exchange for being honest in the long term. And when that honesty eventually becomes visible, when it finally reaches a moment the public can see, it doesn't look like a decision anymore. It looks like a surprise. But it never was one. It was just someone quietly for a long time living exactly as they meant to. There is a myth we've all inherited, passed down through movies and songs and stories told at weddings, that real love announces itself, that it arrives like weather, sudden, dramatic, unmistakable, thunder before rain. A moment where the music swells and everyone in the room turns to look. We've been taught to wait for that moment, to treat its absence as evidence that something isn't real. But anyone who has actually lived through real connection, the kind that survives past the initial spark and settles into something lasting, knows the truth is almost the opposite. The most real things rarely make noise. They arrive quiet, they arrive slow, and by the time you notice them, they've already become undeniable. Fireworks are designed to be seen from far away. They exist for an audience. They burn bright and fast, and then they're gone, leaving behind smoke and a faint ringing in the ears. That's not a flaw in fireworks. That's their entire purpose. They are built for spectacle, not permanence. And yet we've somehow decided that this is what love should look like at its beginning. A burst, a spectacle, an announcement bright enough for everyone to see and remember. We've confused the loud thing with the real thing, mostly because loud things are easier to talk about. Quiet things resist description. They don't translate well into stories because there's no clear moment to point to, no single spark you can hold up and say, this is where it began. Real connection doesn't work that way. It doesn't ask for an audience. It doesn't need witnesses to confirm that it's happening. It shows up in the unremarkable moments, in the comfortable silence between two people who don't feel the need to fill space with words, in the way someone remembers a small detail you mentioned once, in passing weeks ago and brings it up again without being asked. In the steady presence of someone who shows up again and again, not because the moment calls for grand gestures, but because showing up has quietly become who they are around you. None of this makes headlines. None of this looks impressive from the outside, but this is the actual architecture of something built to last. Small, repeated, unglamorous acts of attention stacked patiently on top of each other until one day you look up and realize you've built a home without ever laying down a single dramatic brick. This is precisely why the people closest to a real connection are often the last to notice it fully forming, and the people furthest away, the public, the observers, the audience, are the ones demanding fireworks as proof. When something quiet finally becomes visible to the outside world, there's a strange kind of disappointment in the reaction, an almost audible search for the moment it really began, as if steadiness itself isn't dramatic enough to deserve belief. But steadiness is not the absence of intensity. It is intensity so consistent that it stops registering as intensity at all. It simply becomes the temperature of the room. Consider how differently we're taught to recognize danger versus safety. Danger, we're taught, announces itself, raised voices, sudden movements, unmistakable signs. Safety, on the other hand, is often invisible, precisely because it isn't asking anything of you. It doesn't require your guard to go up. It doesn't require analysis. And so the very quality that makes real connection safe, its lack of urgency, its lack of demand, is the same quality that makes it easy to overlook, even by the people living inside it. We are so trained to look for the alarm bells that we sometimes miss the quiet, steady hum of something that was never trying to alarm us in the first place, because it was never trying to trick us into anything. It was simply true, and true things don't need to perform. There's also something important in the fact that undeniable does not mean loud. Undeniable simply means that eventually denial becomes impossible, not because of a single overwhelming event, but because of an accumulation so consistent that pretending otherwise takes more effort than accepting it. This is how real connection usually reveals itself, even to the two people inside it, not with a single revelation, but with a slow accumulation of moments that individually meant very little, but together mean everything. The 100th quiet evening matters more than the first exciting one, even though only the first one would ever make it into a story told at a party. This is worth sitting with, especially in a culture that rewards spectacle and mistakes attention for value. We've built entire industries around the idea that if something isn't visible, isn't shareable, isn't dramatic enough to summarize in a single sentence, it must not be significant. But some of the most important developments in a person's life happen in complete privacy, without any external confirmation at all, and remain no less real for having gone unwitnessed. The absence of an audience does not diminish the presence of something true. If anything, the fact that something can exist and deepen without ever needing to be observed is proof of its integrity, not evidence against it. And so when something quiet finally does,